an experiment with superimposed footage, I thought about capturing a wide variety of shot sizes and motions. I wanted to see if the product would be a jumble of mess or perhaps something quite beautiful. How far could I take it without it appearing distorted and unrecognisable? I also wanted to experiment with filters and complementary colours in post to see if I could recreate the old art films in the early 50s. Here's what I got. Unlike the old days, superimposing footage has become a lot easier. Before the simple act of turning down the opacity of the images on post-production programs, one would have to expose a film twice or more and overlap it with another exposed piece of film. The shots would become juxtaposed, allowing for two different shots to play over each other, creating an impactful image. One mastermind behind this powerful technique was none other than Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, who perfectly symbolises within this one superimposed image of Norman and his mother's skull that they are simply one person. Superimposition is a great narrative tool. It can be used as a language to suggest things or link characters together. Another Hitchcock example of this was in his film The Wrong Man, filmed in 1956. A man named Manny, mistaken for another man whom has committed a crime, is praying when his face starts to become superimposed on the actual criminal. I referenced Hitchcock a lot in my research because I've noticed that his use of the technique has a lot of purpose to it. In recent years of film, the superimposition has been formed more into a transitional dissolve, mainly used to swiftly move in between scenes with no language attached to it. Although within that era of the 50s, the method was greatly used in artistic film projects. For instance, in this film, The Pleasure Dome, directed by Kenneth Anger in 1954, Anger used up to 4 different images on top of each other, including an array of colours and mirroring. You can tell I took inspiration from this in my experiment. What I particularly like about this is the way the images seem to move into one another, seeming choreographed and orchestrated. In a way, this feeds into Hitchcock's idea of the technique being a narrative device. In particular about this film, I like the intimacy it portrays, especially depicting pleasure, how the people on screen seem to blend and morph into one another. The method is also used to show the passing of time. Paul Thomas Anderson uses this to display a big change in the protagonist's life in There Will Be Blood. He often uses it as a transitional way, but it's to depict a shift in the narrative and the time of the story. Or even like Spielberg using it to show Indiana Jones' trip in Raiders of the Lost Ark, showing a travel line across a map imposed on top of the travelling plane. It seems to be an effective tool for showing movement. Just like the deciding plot point of Badlands, directed by Terrence Malick, where the couple leave town with an uncertain future. But one of my favourite uses of the technique appears in Coppola's Grandfather Part 2, where it's used for the son and father to share the screen, displaying the two men the same age in two different eras. What's powerful here is that it seems that they're almost in the same room. It's also integral in the narrative that we see these two men side by side, as the story of the father influences the son incredibly. Coppola used this in such a way to suggest that the two are no different from each other, the same struggle and hardships that revolve around keeping your family safe. The very start of superimposition was used in the early 20s films, so an actor could appear next to himself on screen. A standard trick these days, achieved very easily, but back then it required copious efforts. Early work, like The Son of the Sheikh from 1926, directed by George Fitzmaurice, included scenes where the actor Rudolph Valentino played both father and son. To achieve the same scene with today's technology, it is a simple split screen, two shots split together, given that you locate the actors correctly within frame. Researching into all of these films, I've come to thank the improvement of post-production technology and how simplified it has become to have the same effect as these old films. By turning the opacity levels down below 50%, it gives the image enough transparency to show another image underneath. By seeing the underlayer, you can determine how prominent you want the image to be. Be cautious what footage you choose, as one may disrupt the other. I found it worked well if one footage was focused on a stationary subject mixed with a moving one. Towards the end of the experiment, I tried 3 videos on top of one another and truly expected it to be a disaster, but I was happy to say that the final product seemed to be pleasant. Adding the colour I felt was honouring the Pleasure Dome film. Just seeing how the colours and shapes come together, I thought it would fit nicely. Playing around with both the shadowing and highlight tints, you're able to mix and match the colours on one image with another, as well as altering and adjusting saturation and vibrancy to round it all off. Overall, I was glad to have experimented with superimposition. I really had no idea how impactful it could be when used correctly. As a result of this, I very much intend to use it in my films that I make in the future. I think all the directors I've noted in this video used it in such a way that conveyed a certain language attached to the narrative they were trying to show. And it definitely makes something clear, that there is a sense of film language achieved when mastering this method, and can be a great weapon in a filmmaker's arsenal.